Tonight on Primetime Politics, getting to work.
Our first objective is to not have any tariffs applied on Canada or the United States.
As Canadian officials endeavor to end the Trump tariff threats, U.S. officials give some clarity about what it's looking for from Canada.
This is a drug war, not a trade war.
Coming up, we'll speak to former Deputy Prime Minister John Manley about next steps, and we'll find out why the president of Unifor says a trade war has been declared and there's no turning back. Plus,
Mike, he makes me swear once in a while. I think he makes a lot of people swear in this country.
The Ontario PC leader on how he really feels about Donald Trump. Could it change the provincial election? This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. The immediate threat has been nullified, but Donald Trump still says punishing tariffs can be applied to Canadian goods if he is not satisfied with what he hears from Canadian officials over the next 30 days, prompting this message from the Trudeau government as it was delivered on CNN earlier today.
We're feeling good about the fact we've got 30 days now to make progress here in Canada and to further our relationship with American authorities and folks on the front line so we can continue to protect our peoples. This precious relationship we have between our countries is worth protecting and investing in. So we simply move forward. We keep moving forward to find the way to keep this important relationship alive and having it thrive.
The public safety minister from earlier today. Now, as for greater clarity of what Americans are looking for from Canada, well, take a listen to what we heard from Donald Trump's senior trade advisor this afternoon.
Prime Minister Trudeau, his initial reaction was the kind of similar reaction we got back during the first term. It's like, okay, we're going to tariff you if you tariff us, and we're going to go up that ladder. And I think he looked at the problem. He looked at what Mexico was willing to do, and I think he came to understand that this is a drug war, not a trade war.
But while drugs may have been the opening salvo yesterday, Donald Trump raised two more grievances, agriculture and banking, when it comes to what he calls unfair treatment from Canada. To talk about this, we're now joined by former Deputy Prime Minister John Manley, currently chair of Jefferies Securities. Mr. Manley, good to see you again. Thank you for taking the time.
Not at all. Thank you, Michael.
Now, I read this morning a comment that you made about this 30-day pause that we're in, saying it provides time to cool down and to try to understand what's actually required of Canada. But I do wonder, how possible is that to know with this administration? Because, as I said, the whole threat started with security, and then yesterday Donald Trump adds to it agriculture and banking.
I know. That's it's a very unfortunate thing because we do have a trade agreement, and it's bad enough that he chose to announce that he was going to weaponize tariffs on something that had nothing to do with trade, justified or not. The issues related to fentanyl and border security are not trade issues. And we have a trade agreement, and he signed it, and he proclaimed it the best agreement ever. And he proposed to unilaterally renege on that agreement by imposing punishing duties on Canadian goods that are crossing the border, forcing us to reciprocate in kind, which would have been chaotic for consumers and for businesses on both sides of the border. Now to raise two other issues, which are perfectly within the category of trade issues, but we negotiated those. The agreement is due for renewal in 2026. And if Mr. Navarro thinks that we should give more on banking and on agriculture, I'll be very interested to see what it is he proposes to give in return. We have an agreement.
You have an agreement, and I've heard people say that obviously these agreements are not worth the paper they're written on if the U.S. president is doing this. But how do you work with that? In addition to being Deputy Prime Minister, you were the Finance Minister, you were the Foreign Affairs and Industry Minister. How do you deal with an administration when the goalposts seem to be moving as to what it actually wants from Canada to feel as if the relationship is quote unquote fair?
Well, also I dealt with the border issues following 9/11 and found myself building a relationship with with Tom Ridge, who had been governor of Pennsylvania, became the first Secretary of Homeland Security. And what we tried to do was we started from a couple of basic assumptions. One is that trade was important both ways for both of our countries. As I say, Governor Ridge had been governor of Pennsylvania. He knew, without me telling him, that Canada was Pennsylvania's most important trading partner. So we started with trade is good, and trade is good for both sides. What are our mutual concerns? At that time, the U.S. concern was security. We also shared the concern about security. So we developed bilateral approaches, including integrated border enforcement teams, including sharing of information, including coordinating visa requirements in order to achieve the goal of greater security. We also developed programs. Those of your viewers that enjoy using their Nexus cards don't need to send me a thank you note. But you know what that tended to do was take the vast majority of people who were willing to go through additional advanced scrutiny and obtain a Nexus card out of the collection of everybody crossing the border. So pretty hard finding a needle in a haystack. So the best thing to do is try to make the haystack smaller. All of that to say, Michael, is that you can do a lot if you can define your common interests and work in good faith and understand what both sides needs and fashion a win-win. If the U.S. administration is unwilling to play according to that game, then it's going to be very, very difficult for our government to be able to get a fix on what it is that they really want and how we can achieve it.
Okay, so if it's hard to get a fix on what they really want, what should this government be doing then? Because, you know, the very fact that Trump is making a tariff threat, that already creates uncertainty about Canada. That also creates uncertainty as to whether or not this is where international businesses want to invest in. So how should Ottawa respond to as you say, a moving target?
Well, I think, first of all, we should do some of the things that we've committed to do. So improving border security is valuable for us as well. We should have better border security. You know, fentanyl is a different subject, that not very much of it goes north to south across that border, or much more of it comes south to north. But we would want to prevent any of it moving across the border in either direction. That's in our interest. Let's get on with it. Let's do it. And furthermore, what the immigration enforcement teams are doing in the United States right now is undoubtedly terrifying many, many people who have been perhaps undocumented in the United States, don't want to be returned to the squalor of Venezuela or somewhere in Central America or other parts of Latin America, and might choose even our frigid winter as a better alternative. So we're going to need those teams, border enforcement teams, to make sure that we're not dealing with an influx of people trying to seek protection from the U.S. immigration enforcement teams. That's not our responsibility. So we should do those things. But on a bigger picture level, Michael, I'd say this should be a wake-up call for Canadians, that it is time for us to think through our strategy over the last 35 years, which has been to promote Canada as a destination for investment, because we're rich in natural resources, because we have talented, well-educated people, we have good institutions, solid institutions, rule of law. You can come here and invest and build your business here and still have unfettered access to the U.S. market. It's whether these tariffs go ahead or not, there's always now, for some time to come, going to be a doubt around that last point. So we're going to have to figure out how to up our game in attracting investment where that access to the U.S. market is less certain than it's been in the past. I'm sorry to reach that conclusion, but I don't think there's anything else that we can do.
Okay, very quickly, because I only have 30 seconds. So what are you talking about here? Incentives to invest, low taxes? What exactly does this government need to pursue?
I think you've got to look at the competitiveness of our tax rates. You've got to look at our regulatory systems. You've got to look at how long it takes us to get projects built. And I'm not just talking about pipelines here. If you look at OECD statistics, it even takes us longer than most countries to build a warehouse. You've got to look at interprovincial trade barriers. They're costing us billions of dollars a year. Self-inflicted wound. We've got to find a mechanism to stop that. We've got to get more of our products to different destinations. So that includes oil and gas. And by the way, we need to be starting to look at energy security ourselves. I know some people thought, well, we can fix them. We'll stop exporting oil from Alberta. They need that. Well, guess what? Eastern Canada needs oil, and especially natural gas, coming from the United States. We do not have energy security in Canada at this time without the United States. We maybe need to think about remedying that.
John Manley, always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, let's continue the conversation now with Lana Payne, president of Unifor, which is this country's largest private sector union. She also sits on the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations. Lana, good to see you again. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Now, listen, we're in the midst of this 30-day pause, and from what I've read, you don't think Canadians should be taking their foot off the pedal, because you, in a statement, essentially said that Donald Trump has declared an economic war in Canada and that there's no turning back. Are you being too inflammatory here?
No, absolutely not. I mean, if you look at how drastic these tariffs would affect Canadian workers and Canadian industries, and the fact that we have been dealing with threats for many, many weeks now from the president around these tariffs, and this is an economic war on the workers of Canada. There's no two ways about it.
And just what impact would these tariffs actually have? You who deal with workers across the country, who deal with the insecurity that they're feeling right now, what are we looking at in terms of numbers if these tariffs actually went through?
I mean, potentially we could be looking at the loss of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of jobs. I think you've heard the Ontario government talk about 500,000 in the province of Ontario alone. A lot of these jobs would be in manufacturing. We are looking at the entire North American auto industry being shut down in a matter of days because it's so interconnected. And the reality is that would be the biggest kind of industrial disruption that we've seen in North America in my lifetime.
Now, the tariffs, though, again, in this 30-day pause, do you think they can be avoided, or do you think they're actually coming down the pipes?
I think the challenge we have right now is that the list of demands and concessions, if I can call them that, from the president continue to grow. The goalposts change, which means that Canada has to get its own economic house in order. It means there's no turning back here now. We can't trust trade agreements with the United States. We've had a trade agreement that this president negotiated. That is the one he's basically tearing up with the threat of these tariffs. And we also have to be concerned about that the continued threat of tariffs has an impact on investment in our country. It continues to create instability, and instability leads to economic crisis.
So a chill effect, as you described there. So how do you respond to that? I know you talk about building stronger, building more resiliency, diversifying the economy, but specifically, what form does that take?
Well, there are a number of things that Canada can do right now, including looking at the industries where we are strong, putting in place strong industrial plans around those industries, supporting the industries who will be impacted by a potential trade war, and looking at new trading partners, but also using the levers that we have. We spend billions and billions of dollars a year in our country on procurement. It's time that we use that money to put Canadians to work and to build the things that we know we can built here in Canada, whether it's transit, whether it's ships, whether it's planes, all of the things that we know Canadians are capable of building with the skills that they have.
You know, I wonder then what message you have for Canadian workers, because whether these tariffs come down or this country changes direction to look for greater diversification, as you say, it seems that we can't avoid economic pain. So what is your message to Canadians right now?
We have to fight, all of us together, and honestly, we have a lot of leverage. And what we saw Saturday was our Prime Minister showing the kind of leverage we have in terms of what we could potentially retaliate against. But there are many non-tariff measures that we could also take that would have, economic negative implications for the United States, and we have to be bold enough to use those that leverage. And I believe in the end, eventually we can get to a point where this goes to a negotiating table. We work at a trade agreement, but at the same time, we carry on with a reset in our country of building a stronger, more resilient Canadian economy.
So a two-pronged attack, if you will. Listen, Lana Payne, I appreciate the time this evening. Thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Well, to the Ontario election now, as the Trump tariff threat is also having an impact there. Doug Ford, the PC leader, styling himself as the best person to fight off economic threats from Donald Trump. But a hot mic moment yesterday captured Ford admitting he was supportive of Donald Trump and his return to the White House. Take a listen.
When the election is, I happen this guy won 100%. Then the guy pulled out the knife and used it.
Again, that was Doug Ford from yesterday. Now take a listen to how the Ontario NDP leader and the Liberal leader in the province responded to that candid moment and admission from Doug Ford.
Doug Ford, he showed you who he is. And we know this guy, right? We know this. This is not news to us. This is who Doug Ford is. He says one thing when he's out front to the microphones in front of all of you, and he says another one behind closed doors.
Somehow there was a benefit in it for him if Donald Trump would succeed, even if it meant that it would hurt Ontario and our economy through punitive tariffs. That's the character of this premier.
Well, with more on the Ontario campaign, we're now joined by Robert Benzie, Queen's Park Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Sabrina Nanji, political writer and the woman behind the Queen's Park Observer. Hello to both of you.
Hi, Michael.
Hey, listen, guys, I'm going to get to that hot mic moment in a bit, but we really want to begin with the larger issue here going into this campaign. Because, when it was essentially declared, the PC leader, Doug Ford, was talking about wanting a strong mandate from Ontario voters in order to fight Donald Trump and these threatened tariffs. There's now this 30-day pause, which essentially takes us beyond the Ontario campaign. Has Doug Ford's campaign strategy been upended here? Rob, I'll get you to start us off.
Well, it's certainly been undermined a little bit, Michael, because as Mr. Ford said when we were speaking this time last week, he needed a stronger mandate. The threat of tariffs coming last Saturday, which of course didn't happen. We have a month's reprieve. So his whole narrative has been about he can stand up to Donald Trump and these tariffs are imminent and there are going to be hundreds of thousands of lost jobs and we may need to spend billions in stimulus. And with that on pause for now, it kind of removes a little bit of the urgency. Now, his campaign was saying today, look, he still needs, there's still that uncertainty, and it's going to be that way for many, many months. Now, the problem is Mr. Ford already had a strong mandate. He has a majority in the legislature here at Queen's Park. He didn't need to face voters until next year, June 2026. So we've been plunged into this $189 million winter election, the first winter campaign in this province since 1981, because the polls are good for Mr. Ford, and he wanted to have this election now. And not for really any other reason than that.
Yeah, and of course it was rumored for months and months even before he pulled the trigger, yeah. Sabrina. So, he finally found a reason in Donald Trump. That reason is now gone. What do you think this does to the Ford campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I had one insider tell me that you live by the tariff and you die by the tariff. And certainly, to Benzie's point, this is going to poke holes in Ford's whole rationale for going to the polls early. I mean, obviously, voters in Ontario will not be voting now before tariffs come down. But, as we heard Ford say today, this is going to be 4 years of this back and forth with Trump. He thinks that, the tariffs are still a very real possibility, and he's essentially, just sticking to his guns. Meanwhile, the opposition, his opposition, the Liberals and the NDP and the Greens are saying that this is totally self-serving, that, Ford has left us in the lurch here, and that, this is just an unnecessary election. But here we are in the thick of it. And so it really is up to the Liberals and the NDP now to sort of shift that conversation to Doug Ford's record, things like healthcare, things like education, stuff that, Ford hasn't been talking about, I think for good reason. He's been trying to keep all the focus on tariffs and the trade war. And really now, I think, if the conversation in the ballot box issue shifts, then I think that that's a vulnerability for Ford and the Conservatives.
Okay, well, vulnerability, as you say, and in comes this hot mic moment, Rob, where Doug Ford, and I don't know if it surprises too many people, but he talked about he was in support of Donald Trump over Kamala Harris. He was happy when Trump won, but his attitude changed when this tariff threat came in. But given the fact that he was rooting for Donald Trump, what type of opportunity does that give for both Liberals, NDP, and I'll add the Greens onto that in terms of finding a weakness in the Ford campaign?
Well, Bonnie Crombie's Liberals pounced right away, Michael. They had an ad ready to go this morning.
What else does he say when he thinks you're not listening?
Was I happy this guy won? 100% I was. 100% I was.
One of the most read stories on our website, thestar.com today, because there's a lot of interest in this. Remember, this election was all about Doug Ford styling himself as the anti-Trump. He wears the blue hat that says Canada is not for sale, and in opposition to the Make America Great red baseball caps that President Trump wears. Now, the problem now is now that it's emerged that Mr. Ford was a secret Trump cheerleader, and it comes out on a hot mic like that, it undermines a lot of their narrative. And I mean, he struggled to explain it earlier today in Ottawa. I don't think he was very convincing. And I'm a bit surprised that he did want Trump to win, because during the pandemic he complained about Trump cutting off PPE exports to Canada. He complained about Trump doing some other things during the last trade war in 2019. And also, he is friendly with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who was Vice President Harris's running mate, and his office was delighted to share pictures of the two of them together here at Queen's Park last summer. So it really is a bit of a head scratcher. And look, Mr. Ford has a huge lead in the public opinion polls. This is unlikely to cost him the election, but it's certainly a setback. Yesterday was for sure the worst day that he's had on the campaign trail so far.
Yeah, Sabrina, what do you say? Worst day in the campaign, opportunity for the opposition? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, of course, this was fodder for the NDP and the Liberals. And as Benzie said, they pounced right away. Mart Stiles, NDP leader, said it's really sad that Ford loves Trump, but Trump doesn't even know who Ford is. And yeah, he did have a hard time explaining it. He sort of doubled down today in Ottawa and said, he thought Trump was going to be better than he was, even though he was talking about, tariffs throughout his campaign. And I don't know if it's that surprising. In the past, Ford has called himself a big Republican and voiced his support for Trump. But Benzie's right. That did change, especially during COVID, when we had those steel tariffs. So it really does feel like he shot himself in the foot here. But I don't know if it's going to stick to him. Obviously, it's not a good look right now when, we are in the midst of this trade war, and who knows what's going to come in the next weeks and months. But it has been fodder for the opposition. I don't know if this is going to stick. I don't know if this is going to be a story beyond this week or even these days, because I really think now is the time for Bonnie Crombie and Mart Stiles to really be hammering forward on things that are closer to home, more domestic policy, healthcare, education, cost of living. What we know from the polls is that at least, up until this whole tariff situation exploded in recent days, that U.S. relations and tariffs wasn't even that high on Ontarians' radar. They are still preoccupied with cost of living, with healthcare, with access to a doctor. And if you're getting gouged at the grocery store, or you're worried about your kids being able to afford a home, I think that the possibility of potential tariffs down the line is not really top of mind for you. And we are going to the polls on February 27th.
Yeah, we're going to the big polls, but I actually want to bring in the little poll right now? Because Rob and you have both referenced the fact that Doug Ford is doing well in terms of public surveys. Abacus Data doing one for the Toronto Star a few days ago, Rob. Let's take a look at the numbers right now, because when you look at it, 47% is the vote share that the PCs can rely on right now. The Liberals are in second place, 24%, followed by the NDP at 19%, the Greens at 7%. So, you know, I hear what you're saying there, Sabrina, in terms of looking for more domestic issues. Healthcare alone, you talk about millions of Ontarians without access to primary care. But will those issues really be able to punch through right now? Can the opposition do that when you look at just how substantial of a lead Doug Ford has right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason why, you know, Ford is leading, especially because in recent days, as soon as this campaign kicked off, it was all to talk about tariffs. And so Ford is able to suck up all the oxygen in the room and nab headlines because, you know, tariffs was the subject of the day. And it is this interesting dynamic because, you know, in his capacity as premier, he was making announcements that have now been, you know, put on pause, like pulling American booze from LCBO shelves, canceling that $100 million deal with Elon Musk's Starlink. You know, that was a quick pivot that they had to do once the tariff situation sort of resolved temporarily. But yeah, you know, there has been these criticisms are still landing for Ford because this has just been what the conversation is about, and it has been a struggle for, you know, Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles, who are not, you know, technically in power now, and so I think that, you know, with all of this uncertainty, people are looking to Ford in his capacity as premier. So it is this interesting dynamic. And, you know, Ford had to sort of defend wearing both of these hats. He's taking 2 trips to Washington, one just next week. And it's, you know, while he's campaigning to be premier of Ontario. So it is this interesting dynamic, but it's also, you know, playing very well into the for the Conservatives right now.
Yeah, and that does go to the numbers, at least right now. Rob, quickly running out of time, but I'll get you because, you know, a line that's resonating in my head right now when I look at these numbers is a line that you wrote in your own article about this poll. You said you spoke to a Tory insider who said the only person that can really defeat Doug Ford is Doug Ford. So does this throw him off his game?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I thought he struggled today in Ottawa to answer the question. And the only candidate that they are worried about is Doug Ford. I mean, and they know that. I mean, they know that when he's on his game, he's a very effective communicator and a strong politician, like electioneering. When he's off his game, you know, things go off the rails. And I think that's what happened yesterday in Etobicoke. I think part of the problem with doing so well in the polls is you can get seduced by them, Michael. You can start to think that you can do no wrongs, and you get cocky. And when you get cocky, you make mistakes. He made a big mistake yesterday. Whether it haunts him till February 27th, I don't know. But it was not a good look. It undermined the entire frame of his election campaign and made him look a little more cynical than I think he would like.
Okay, well, we continue to watch. Rob, Sabrina, thank you for that. Although, Rob, I feel like calling you Benzie following Sabrina's lead on this. Thank you to the two of you for that. Take care, guys.
See you, Michael. See you, Sabrina. Bye.
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 And that is our program for this Tuesday evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow. Until then, take care.